35 years ago, I left the Romanian capital, Bucharest, with my good friend Bob Wiley, my co-author of this book, of which we are both still very proud. It has stood the test of time and was published in Romanian and sold in very large numbers in Romania, although the conversion rate nowadays is, a lot tighter than it was then. Downfall, the Ceaușescus and the Romanian Revolution. Bob Wiley and I arrived when everything was dark. The country was on the floor. The smoke was still rising from some of the buildings that had seen shootouts between arisen people and the Securitate, the security of the late leader Nicolae Ceaușescu, who, together with his missus, only minutes after this picture was taken, was gunned down on Christmas Day. Gunned down after a drumhead tribunal, no kind of trial, and summarily executed up against a wall. He was a fascinating character. I had always been interested in him. Even in the pantheon of communist leaders, he was like a peacock. He was a very odd bird indeed. And he practiced the most double-dealing, triple-dealing, quadruple-dealing kind of communism that anyone had ever seen. In the end, it didn't save him from the execution squad. He, for example, traded the hundreds of thousands of Romanian Jews who now live in Israel, some of whose children, grandchildren, are hanging out in the casino just across from my hotel in Bucharest now. They come to Romania, though their grandparents left here, gratefully no doubt, to get out of what had become the hellhole of Ceaușescu's Romania for a variety of reasons, not all of them his fault. He traded them basically for Western favour, and he got it back. Richard Nixon made a state visit to communist Romania and posed in an open-top car. There was no Elm Street there in downtown Bucharest. Richard Nixon and Nicolae Ceaușescu. In fact, Ceaușescu and his missus were billeted with the Queen in Buckingham Palace and took an open-top carriage down the Mall. Just like, I don't know, Bashar al-Assad some years later. The double dealing was, of course, to pretend to be a communist country whilst actually being a cutthroat capitalist on the side. It was a path that China partly borrowed from, and it could have led to success, but at the very nadir of Romania's debt crisis, a debt crisis in debt to Western bankers and Western lenders, he fell. Well, people were cold, they were hungry, and the gigantic People's Palace that he had erected, nowadays regarded as an architectural and cultural jewel in the firmament of European civilization, was then seen as typical of his extravagant grandiosity. In this book, I interview over dinner on the Shabbat the chief rabbi of Romania. Many of you will find it fascinating. It's not easy to get the book now. This is my last dog-eared companion. But if you can read Romanian, it's still plenty available here. So I ended up in Bucharest for the first time in 35 years. And I'm here for Manchester United's final group stage game in the Europa League tomorrow. But when I was on the plane, a Ryanair filled almost entirely with working class, mainly white, men from the greater Manchester area, they started singing a song which I had not expected to hear. Knowing that they were coming to Bucharest, they began to sing "There's Only One Andrew Tate." I'm not making that up. That really happened, as everybody who was on that plane can testify. This fascinated me. I asked one of the people who was singing it what it was about Andrew Tate that made them sing that song. And the response was so fascinating, I arranged to interview both Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan Tate in this show tonight. We'll not be able to cover in the time available every aspect of what they stand for or are believed to stand for, everything that's happened to them and is still happening to them. But here I am, as a result of a song on a plane, coming to watch Manchester United in the compound of the Tate brothers, talking to you and shortly to be talking to them. But there's much else to talk about as well. I talked in the introduction there about the snake, the year of the snake. Myself, I'm glad I wasn't born in the year of the snake. I don't like snakes, but I dare say they do some good. But the snakes at Sky News, who are about to leap off the sinking ship of the once proud Rupert Murdoch flagship of Sky News, are the kind of snakes I really, really dislike. I could go through them, name them one by one. I have had fun with them over the years. I've enjoyed picking them up, turning them upside down, and wiping the floor with them. From Westminster in 2006 to Rochdale in 2024 to Kazan in Russia at the BRICS summit in 2024 towards the end of it. I've enjoyed kicking them around the park. But the vile, pernicious role the outfits like Sky News have played ever since Wapping, through the strikes that they smeared and slandered, where working men and women stood up for their rights, they could always count on Sky News as their enemy. Well, the same forces that caused those strikes, the same forces that threw millions of decent working men and women in Britain out of work and onto the scrap heap, are about to do the very same to them. I know that schadenfreude is something that we are taught to avoid, taking pleasure in the misfortune of others. We're brought up to avoid it, lest we grow up and end up as Rupert Murdoch journalists or Sky News reporters. But it is difficult for me, as someone on the receiving end of decade after decade after decade of vicious, vile, often slanderous abuse from these hirelings, these lick-spittles of first Rupert Murdoch and then Comcast, that they should now be getting their just deserts. A trip to the Unemployment Bureau. Some of them might land on their feet, though, as Matt Taibbi pointed out in an epic interview. If you listen to nothing else from me this evening, watch the Tucker Carlson interview with Matt Taibbi, in which they describe the death. Taibbi declares it dead now. The so-called mainstream media is dead, and the imminent closure of Sky News and the hopefully equally imminent closure of CNN, the bargain basement share price and massive staff layoffs at all of the liberal broadcasters in America proves Taibbi right. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, let me turn on Channel 525 or whatever it is to find out from Sky News what's really going on in the world, because they know that's probably the last place they're going to find out what's really going on in the world. Matt Taibbi makes clear the future of broadcasting is here. It's on Joe Rogan. It's on Tucker Carlson. It's on Jimmy Dore. It's on the Grey Zone. And probably in a few weeks, it'll be on whatever platform the Tate brothers decide to launch. Because it's immediate, because you've got more chance of hearing the truth, and because you can flit between one and the other and make your own estimation of the truth, because you'll hear a cacophony of different points of view, and you can make your own judgments on the views freely spoken on those platforms, none of which is true on Sky News, on CNN, or what passes for so-called mainstream media. But the snakes at Auschwitz were even more poisonous. I've been in battle all day. I've even been readers noted. Doesn't happen to me often. When I pointed out that the Soviet Red Army suffered 600,000 dead soldiers liberating Poland alone, just Poland, and another 150,000 dead in the battle for Berlin. 26 million Soviet citizens, 11 million of them, soldiers, gave their life's blood, died in the defeat of Hitler's Germany. All the more reason then why, on the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the most notorious of all the Nazi death camps in Poland, the one person not invited was any representative of Russia, the successor state to the Soviet Union. The Germans were there. Yeah, the people who murdered millions of people in Auschwitz. The Ukrainians were there. The people who guarded the inmates in Auschwitz. The Poles were there. The people who built the death camps. King Charles was there, for God's sake. But the Soviet Union, through its successor state, Russia, was deliberately not just uninvited. No whisper spoke its name. All the speakers talked about the liberation on that day, but none of the speakers would utter the name of the country whose army gave hundreds of thousands of their soldiers lives in order to liberate it. It is the most grotesque thing. Some of you think it's ancient history, but it isn't to me. I was born just 10 years after the liberation of Auschwitz by the Red Army. I grew up under the cloud of the Second World War, playing in the bomb damage of the Second World War, playing in air raid shelters, mucking around in craters. The Second World War shaped the world until now. And now you realize the truth of the statement made by Marshal Zhukov, the great Soviet general, the liberator of Berlin. He said, "We have liberated Europe from Nazism. They will never forgive us." And that's true, you know. It's true all over again. I've got nearly 1 million people engaged on my simple tweet about the losses suffered by the Red Army in the liberation of Poland. I've got Polish people coming on to me to say, well, the Soviet Union then set up a puppet government. The Soviet Union did this crime or whatever in Poland. Some of them have got a point. But the bigger point is if Poland had not been liberated from Nazism, no Pole would be alive in the world today. None. No Jew would be alive in the world today. None. Because if Hitler had stayed in power, if he had not been defeated overwhelmingly by the Red Army, 88% of all German casualties in the Second World War were inflicted by the Soviet Red Army. 88%. Losing, as I said, 26 million of their own people. If that had not happened, Hitler's extermination camps would have gone on exterminating all the Jews, all the Slavs, all the gays, all the gypsies, all the Jehovah's Witnesses, all the communists, all the socialists, until not one of them was left alive. So whatever beef you've got with the Soviet Union in 1944 or 1974 or Russia in 2024, you cannot be allowed to rewrite history. You cannot be allowed to pretend that what happened didn't happen, or pretend that something else entirely happened. President Trump, maybe a slip of the tongue, said this week that he loved the Russian people. They had helped America win the Second World War. This is monumental foolishness. The United States, for all its great contribution in the Pacific against the Japanese, who attacked them first, of course, for all its gallantry on the beaches of Normandy, it was the Soviet Union that won the war. America helped the Soviet Union win the war, not the other way around. And why am I laboring this? Apart from the fact that it means a lot to me, self-evidently. I'm laboring it because it is a shadow over the world today. The reason that we've come so close to World War III in the last 24 months, 36 months nearly, is because we have never forgiven them. We don't like Russia being powerful, united, successful. We don't want its economy to boom. We don't like its relationship with China. Which brings me to the biggest piece of good news this week. For a couple of $1 million, a Chinese entrepreneur has come up with an AI which has beaten the pants of the multi-billion investments of American AI, to the extent that the American stock market dropped $1.3 trillion. Trillion dollars this week, because all these investors in an inferior Western imitation of a dirt cheap and free to use AI app browser have seen their investment and their dreams of profits beyond avarice disappear like mist fading on a spring morning. They realize that China has again triumphed. China is better at capitalism than the capitalists themselves. Discuss. It's the mother of all talk shows, and Andrew Tate himself is up right now. Stay tuned.